Congressman, welcome back to the program here. You support the president's strategy with Iran, the attack on Iran here. I'm curious what you understand the exit strategy to be, and more importantly, the timeline.
Well, one, regime change, and no one can predict what that timeline is. I mean, bottom line is you're talking about a country that chanted death to America by its leaders. They had nuclear capabilities, were building them. There's no question about that. The ballistic missiles that they were building up, strictly to fire not only on our allies overseas, but also thousands of Americans based overseas. So the reason for being there is a good one. And until we get complete regime change and put someone in charge who is somewhat friendly to the United States. And look, there's millions of Iranians we know that are stuck in their homes, hiding, if you will, scared because the last time they came out to protest their government, over 30,000 of them were murdered. So we know the people of Iran want regime change, and we're going to do all we can to stay there until it's finally done.
But what's it going to take for this revolt to begin? You know, when these bombs started dropping originally, everyone thought that the revolt might begin then. But this has been going on for several weeks now. The leader has been taken out. His son has now taken over. What's it going to take for regime change there?
Well, again, I think it's going to take for the people to rise up. But again, they're scared. And I don't blame them one bit. I mean, when 30,000 of them get murdered by their own government for protesting, they're scared. And the problem is the people in government are armed and the citizens are not. So it's going to take time. Look, when the Berlin Wall fell and countries across the world, the people finally rose up and got rid of horrific dictators and communist dictators in those countries. So we've seen this before. I mean, it doesn't happen overnight. It's going to take time. But the world is going to be way better off for generations to come when we have complete regime change in Iran.
The Pentagon is sending more than 2,000 soldiers to the Middle East from the 82nd Airborne there in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. There's already U.S. Marines on the ground there in the Middle East, too. Do you support boots on the ground inside Iran?
Well, look, no one has said that that's absolutely going to happen. So, you know, let's see where we are in a couple of weeks. But there's no guarantee, and no one has ever said that we're going to have boots on the ground in Iran.
Is that something you'd back, though?
Look, I'm not in the Situation Room. I don't have advice from the Joint Chief of Staff. Certainly the president does, and Secretary Hegseth. So I'm not at a level, you know, of any knowledge of what's going on over there. I don't have intelligence debriefing the way they have for me to answer that question.
Congressman, I remember 2 years ago very plainly, President Trump, then former President Trump, campaigning on no more foreign wars, America first. That was, those were the ideals of his campaign. Now, obviously, we are in Iran. We took out the dictator in Venezuela. Some Republicans, though, have said the attack on Iran is a betrayal of those America first ideas. What are your thoughts on that?
No, it's not a betrayal at all. Look, again, you're talking about leaders of a country who are chanting death to America, death to Americans for 40 to 50 years. They have a record of killing Americans, targeting Americans around the world. So, the opportunity was there when all those leaders, 40 plus leaders were in one room. The intelligence was amazing. And the president and Benjamin Netanyahu took that opportunity to take out those very leaders who have been chanting death to America, death to Israel. And it was, if you ask me, it's been validated and will be validated when we have complete and total regime change there. And we and our allies overseas are no longer scared of Iran, the way they, not scared, but, living under the conditions we have for the last 40 years.
What would make you oppose this war in Iran? Anything specific?
I'm not opposed to the war in Iran. I mean, we're taking out completely their ability to have any nuclear weapons. There's no question. Even after our massive bombing of them a few weeks ago, there was evidence that they were re-enriching uranium again. And again, the buildup of ballistic missiles, I don't think that's really been talked about enough. They were a factory of building up and increasing hundreds of thousands of ballistic missiles. And let's be very clear as well. They funded terrorist organizations around the world as well. There's no question they were funding and supplying Hezbollah with missiles. There was no question they were funding and supplying in Gaza the terrorists there. So, they have a real record, a long record of supplying terrorists around the world and having a horrific regime of killing Americans and killing our allies around the world.
Let's talk about DHS funding for a moment here, Congressman. Congress about to leave here on a 2-week break. Still no agreement on funding DHS. Everything still rests right now as we speak in the Senate. But with these elevated threats because of what's happening in Iran, are you comfortable with any lapse at all in funding in DHS?
Well, of course. And let's be very clear. Today, we're going to take the 8th vote in funding DHS out of the House. And we're going to send another bill over to the Senate. And all they have to do is ratify what we have sent over there, and it goes to the president, and all this is over. But the Senate Democrats are holding out for whatever reason. They're using our TSA agents, our men and women across the world in the Coast Guard as political pawns. And it's just a complete and total lack of understanding on Chuck Schumer and the Senate Democrats to what the average day of American is going through. TSA agents, over 450 of them have left their jobs. And all because they scared. I mean, they haven't received a paycheck, and they're scared when their next paycheck is coming. So they're taking other jobs or leaving their TSA jobs. And we're seeing it across the country in airports, 4 to 5 hour lines to go through security. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it's all in the hands of Chuck Schumer and the Senate Democrats.
Democrats did offer, though, to fund TSA and still hold out and discuss and debate the funding for immigration and customs enforcement. Why didn't Republicans take that? And
well,
the president
because they would continue to hold out and hold out and hold out. There is a bill sitting on their desk to fully fund TSA and fund Homeland Security. Again, we're talking about the Coast Guard as well. We're talking about a number of things that supply safety for Americans across this country. There's no reason to hold anything out. The only solution is to pass that bill, fully fund Homeland Security, and move on and let the TSA agents get paid and the Coast Guard get paid.
What happened in Minneapolis obviously is still a sticking point for Democrats with immigrations and customs enforcement agents there. Are there any reforms that you would agree with in order to get something passed?
Well, I think a major reform has already happened. I mean, there's a new head of Homeland Security, and this is what I don't understand. So Markway Mullen now has been confirmed. He's now the Secretary of Homeland Security. I mean, and Tom Homan went into Minnesota.
Democrats want face masks removed and judicial warrants before going into private property and things like that. Would you agree to any of that?
Well, that's all up for negotiations in the Senate Democrats. I mean, again, we passed the bill in the House. We send over to the Senate. All they have to do is ratify it and send it to the president.
I want to ask you about a headline that kind of escaped. Let me ask you this. Let's talk about a number that escaped a lot of headlines here recently. President Trump's going to release his new budget this coming week, and the United States just passed $39 trillion in debt. I'm curious if you expect to support this budget without any substantial cuts in it.
Well, I've always been a conservative. I've always voted for balanced budgets in Austin when I was there for 12 years. In fact, we have billions of dollars in surplus in Texas and an Austin budget. Different here. I hate, how we have the $38 trillion in debt. Again, being a conservative Republican, it drives me crazy. So I'm all for making as many cuts as we possibly can in the budget. And so I'm going to fight and advocate for that as long as I'm here.
Here's what struck me, though, about this headline. An additional $1 trillion of debt just happened in the last 5 months. I think back about what President Trump and Republicans ran on here, especially Doge. I mean, we all remember what happened with Doge in the first few months. That we're going to, cut the fat and waste, fraud, and abuse out of government. But there's another $1 trillion of debt that's been stacked.
Let's be very clear, Jason. But let's be clear where we are. So we are 1 year in the Trump administration. The big, beautiful bill that we passed and he signed on July 4th was the start of Doge. So there were a lot of, 11 committees went in there and said, where can we cut the waste, fraud, and abuse that you had the oversight of in all your committees? So that was passed and signed on July 4th. That wasn't even a year ago. Then we came back and spent all the fall passing the Trump budget. So the Trump budget really just got approved in January. minus the approval of the Health and Human Services. I'm sorry, the Homeland Security.
Yeah.
So we're just in the Trump budget. It has just begun. So cutting the waste, fraud, and abuse and trying to cut down on government spending is in the Trump budget. It just doesn't happen overnight. It's going to take months, if not into next year.
Legislation you led called the Homeowner Energy Freedom Act passed the House. This repeals Biden-era regulations that essentially promote electric appliances in houses rather than gas appliances. How much is this really going to lower the cost for homeowners if the Senate approves this and the president signs it?
Well, the estimates are, up to $30,000 per home, Jason. That's substantial. So Biden, regulations and requirements on green energy, forcing homeowners across the nation, require them to buy certain appliances. That's absolutely ridiculous, because at the end of the day, all that's going to do is make the homeowner truly pay a government tax for a government mandate, a government regulation. And, if you recall, in the 12 years I was in the State House, I passed more deregulation bills than anybody in the Texas House. And I'm continuing that here. So that's a major government regulation that we were able to pass out of the House. And I hope the Senate passes as quickly as possible, get rid of another Biden mandate that all it does at the end of the day is cost the American taxpayer a lot of money.
You have another bill that will eliminate the capital gains tax that people pay when they sell their home, providing that they've lived in it for 2 years here. Well, why eliminate that tax entirely? It hasn't been updated since 1997, you pointed out, but why not just adjust it for inflation?
Yeah, why adjust it for inflation? Why do we need to pay capital gains when you home on? And this actually came to me from a constituent. I didn't know it existed, but yeah, a constituent said, I bought my house. I've put all this equity into it. I built it up. I should be able to basically keep that equity that I put into it when I sell it. If I improve the house and it's a nicer house and I make more money on it, why do I have to hand that money over to the government? Why should anyone have to hand over the money to the government when they've put the sweat, tears, and effort into making it a nicer home, and they were able to get more money for it? The government has no right to have a handout in that case.
Are there any guardrails that you think should be in place or are in place in this legislation to keep investors from flipping homes every 2 years?
Well, but why does that matter? I mean, it's a market out there. It's a homeowner market. So if someone buys a home and wants to sell it, again, the government has no say and should have no role in the capital gains of selling of a home.
Congressman, always good to go ahead.
I'm frankly for getting rid of all capital gains. I'm for getting government's hand out of our American taxpayers' pockets as much as possible.
Congressman, always good to see you. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it.